Hi, welcome to this webinar on green resistance in Ukraine, protecting nature in times of war. This webinar is organized by Pulse. Pulse is a European initiative promoting cross-border collaborations between journalists and newsrooms across Europe, covering European stories in a new, hopefully, way. The webinar today will look at environmental issues in wartime Ukraine, looking at the damages that the war has brought about to the nature and environment and animals of Ukraine, but focusing not much on the destruction itself, but rather on stories and hints of resilience, resistance, and activism that continue happening in Ukraine despite all what happens. So there is stories of attempts to defend protected areas, endangered animals, biodiversity, which are directly threatened by war and wildfires caused by the war clashes, and but also look at how environmental activists have been working in Ukraine in order to campaign and promote their issues and views. And also we will look at how the future reconstruction of Ukraine after the war will or could match with the green transition. So whether the reconstruction will favor and to what an extent, or will be in opposition to some extent with the necessary green transition. In the meantime, let me introduce our guests today. And let me also thank them again for being available and joining us in this conversation. So today we will have with us Viktoriia Hubareva, who is a journalist working for Rubryka, which is an independent media based in Ukraine, which focuses a lot on solutions journalism, so telling a lot of interesting and to some extent encouraging stories, also from the very local level. So it's a very interesting publication in case you don't know it. Then we have Aleksei Ovchinnikov, who is freelance journalist and also the editor-in-chief of the UVEC work group, which deals precisely with the wartime Ukraine and the environmental consequences of the war in Ukraine. You will find the links and the details about their work in the chat or later on. And we have Iryna Stavchuk, who's not a journalist, who is dealing with many interesting, or has been dealing with many interesting activities, including being part of the Ukrainian government in the past, but now she is the director for Central and Eastern Europe and of the Ukraine programs at the European Climate Foundation. And she was also co-founder of environmental NGOs in Ukraine, so she will bring some of her experience and perspectives to our conversation. We will start now discussing with them. If you have any questions or comments or also technical issues of some sort, you can use the chat. We will keep an eye on it. And any case, in any way, at the final part of this webinar will be open for your comments, questions, any other input or feedback you might have. So you will have the chance to interact either directly at the end in the final part of the webinar, or through the chat whenever you want. So let's dive into the topic. And as you, well, I imagine that most of you are aware of the fact that the war ongoing in Ukraine since 2014, and especially the large-scale invasion since 2022, have a serious environmental impact in Ukraine. It's not hard to imagine why a war has environmental impact in terms of fires and destruction and pollution and harm that is done to animals and plants and natural habitats. And there's many different instances in which this happens. And I'm sure many of you have heard specific news about large-scale flooding as a result of the collapse or destruction of the dam in central Ukraine, and a number of other news reports about, for instance, wildfires at a very large scale happening in these years, and so on. Our idea today is not to simply, or actually to focus on the destruction component, but to discuss and present what is being done in order to resist to this destruction, in order to counter it, in order to restore nature, and also what is being done aside from war-related destruction in order to keep the work for the decarbonization of Ukraine, for contrasting climate change, for protecting animals regardless of the war, for recycling, and so on. So a number of other environmental issues still matter a lot, and the focus, of course, is not on them, but is rather on defense issues in many cases. And of course, we will deal with the reconstruction issue. So how to reconstruct Ukraine and how it's possible, if it is possible, hopefully, to take advantage of the reconstruction efforts and investments in order to push Ukraine closer towards a green transition and invest more in favor of the environment. I'll stop here. I'll give the floor in the first place to Viktoriia, maybe, who can tell us a little bit more on what is done, or which actions are taken in the short run, so even at a small stage, at this stage, in order to try to limit some of the damages that the war causes on the environment in Ukraine. If you wanna start.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Lorenzo, and hi, everyone. And thank you for being here today. And about our question, what Ukrainians do to stop the damage of the war, to stop the environmental damage of the war. Of course, we have a lot of different initiatives. Some of them are smaller, some bigger. We have NGOs that rescue animals, for example. We have different cases of small projects, but for me, I wanted to highlight one, and the most striking and the most large-scale case of that, like a large-scale case of reaction to military actions on the nature-protected territories. So, if you may know, Askania Nova is a biosphere reserve, that's UNESCO biosphere reserve, in Kherson region in Ukraine, and it was occupied in 2022. And there were many publications in the media about the damage that military actions cause to the unique zoo collection and to the steppes of the territories and to other things. But what remained out of the media, there were people who worked there, like scientists and other specialists who work in the nature biosphere reserve, and why they were not so highlighted, like problems in the biosphere reserve. That was it was unsafe for them while they were stayed on their territories. And there were so many things that can terrify people, because when the director of Askania Nova, when he get to the Ukraine controlled territory, he published his memories about the time, and he wrote really so many different and very bad things that Russian did on the territories, and about the propaganda, and about the surge in the office of that biosphere reserve. So what I want to say is that people who work there, the scientists, they were in danger too. And that issue is also about, that is also an environmental issue, because when people who work in that sphere are in danger, that's also an issue of the war. So why I wanted to say about Askania Nova, because that was the first case where a biosphere reserve, like a legal entity, was relocated. I think that was the first case in the war when the biosphere reserve was relocated to the other territories. So, like a legal entity, it was relocated to Odessa region, and it received new territories, and they were not protected earlier. So, what do we have now? We Ukraine compensated lost and damaged nature protected areas with new protected areas, and that's unconventional, and but that is the most necessary reaction that we should do, like compensate lost and damaged territories with new protected territories.
Yeah, this is a very interesting case, I think, a bit extreme in a way, relocating an entire protected area in a way. It's somehow in keeping with the smaller endeavors of relocation. So what we also read or told also through polls was that some scientists making efforts in order to relocate endangered plant species, for instance, from regions that risked to be like risk extinction, and basically to replicate them elsewhere, and also to evacuate animals from areas which were too close to the front line, and relocate them in other areas. So this is in the short run, this kind of relocating precious species or protected areas seems to be a strategy, right?
Yeah, we have some examples of relocating, for example, seeds collections to another regions, or collections of I need 10 seconds. Collections of herbariums, for example, to more safe place, and that also could be an example.
Yeah, I think one of our Spanish partners published a story about the evacuation of 2 belugas from the Kharkiv Delphinarium to Spain, and that's one of the most incredible stories I've read, I think, in the last year, on how these belugas were evacuated by land to Moldova and then by plane to Spain. It was a very impressive operation with the support from activists and scientists from all over Ukraine and then elsewhere. But maybe Alexia, you also monitor on a, I would say, probably daily basis what goes on with the environment and war in Ukraine. So you probably have other stories, and you might also maybe tell us a little bit on what limitations do activists and scientists and so on deal with in the short run in terms of security and funding and human capital and teams and so on. So how is their capacity affected by the wartime circumstances?
Well, thank you for, hello everyone, and thank you for inviting to this webinar. And we started to talk about Ascania Nova, and one story that I heard not so many times ago. We also published it on UREC. It was research by Ursa Media that administration of occupied administration of Ascania Reserve, they started to sell zebras, these horses from the collection. So, and we also have a lot of examples when occupied territories, they're beginning to use for selling woods and animals and so on. And for me, the main problem right now is to analyze what's happening on occupied territories. So, I mean, Donetsk, Lugansk region, also Crimea and other territories. Because for me, it's like terra incognita, any activism, any watchdog there is forbidden. So we don't have any information about it. We're just trying to use OSINT analysis, just satellite analysis, to understand what's happening. What, for example, happened with Kremensky forest in Luhansk region. But yeah, it's very hard. Well, when we talk about resources, of course, right now all environmental and climate activists, they have problems with finances, and it's all around the world. But for me, what I really think that people should think more that what's happening in Ukraine from perspective of environment and climate consequences, it's not like Ukrainian war. So it's influence on the whole Europe. I have a lot of examples, like there are a lot of transborder pollution, for example, in Black Sea, and also militarization of the borders we can see in Poland and Lithuania and other countries. And also this carbon fuel rush and collapse of some international institutions like the Ramsar Convention. So it means that for me right now, we should understand that this is a war. If we are environmental and climate activists, which can influence on the whole region, on the whole Europe. And to spread information in this way, I think it can really help to keep focus on Ukraine. Because I really think that right now people are getting more tired about these stories, and they can switch to another stories, but they don't understand the scale of this tragedy, what's happening right now in Eastern Europe. So it's really a big problem for Europe, for region, and for the whole world, I think so. And also when we understand it, so I think that our support will be much more higher, because it will bring more enthusiasm, more resources just to deal with this horrific full-scale invasion, just to stop it and to start green recovery of Ukraine, which also can be for me the solution for Europe, because I really believe that the keys for Green Deal, for this policy of climate neutrality in Europe, the keys are in Ukraine. If recovery of Ukraine will be green, it also means that these very ambitious plans of Green Deal can be realized in Europe.
Yeah, we will we'll definitely talk more about recovery and the impact that the EU accession might have on Ukraine and the other way around, as you rightly point out. Focusing on the activists, the layer and action. You mentioned that it's very important this awareness abroad of the issues. So it is not something confined to Ukraine. This is an issue that has an impact elsewhere. Do you think, or do you have also experience of meaningful and effective cross-border support to environmental activists in Ukraine, or what could be done more or should be done more by either citizens and civil society in the rest of Europe, or by governments and public institutions or international organizations and so on? What could benefit the most the people who are on the ground at this stage working with environmental issues?
Thank you, Lorenzo, and thank you for initiating. That's not the question to me, or
it was for Aleksei, I think, but
okay,
but we can also
sorry.
hear from you actually. So.
You can start, yeah, if you want.
I think, Iryna, yeah, you can start. You're also very well positioned for this question, so it probably was natural for you. I totally understand. So yeah. Feel free to go first.
Sorry. Yeah,
No worries,
I just wanted
no
maybe also to add to what has been brought and discussed, like how, in general, the war impacts environment. And what we can see is that yes, there is a direct war impact, but also there are several processes happening in the parallel. So because of the war, because of restriction to information, less resources, we also see the indirect environmental impacts from this war, because there are less resources, like actually no resources on the national and regional level to fund any environmental activities. So these budgets are in many cases kind of equal to zero. There is more pressure to biodiversity territories, which are remaining in Ukraine because there is less land. So there is more pressure to have more territories diverse to agricultural lands. There is more, and a very big case on construction, unfortunately, of the wind power plants in very important areas of Carpathian Mountains. So that's also kind of indirect impacts of the war which are happening, and that's very unfortunate. Talking about environmental organizations, I would say that, first of all, like one of the challenges, but also that's the overall situation, is many of members of environmental organizations and staff are also serving in the army, and the rest are also involved very much into volunteer activities and supporting the army, because that's kind of part of the situation, and the whole society we still need to work on kind of ending this war and getting the peace. From the beginning, kind of many organizations which were working as a watchdog function, kind of more working on policy advocacy and making sure that the decisions which are taken the right ones, they actually kind of shifted to more practical work, working with willing authorities, especially with local municipalities, to help and directly support on certain transformations to happen. So just to give an example, several organizations which kind of have been working on climate and energy policy advocacy, like Greenpeace, Eco Action, Eco Club Rivne, they started already from 2022 trying to see what climate kind of solutions can help in the energy crisis. And they were the first ones to implement first pilot projects on kind of heat pumps and solar plants being installed at critical infrastructure like hospitals and water utilities. And they proved that it's actually working. And like through all these years, we see that this is developing, and the role of civil society organizations, which was critical at the beginning, actually still remains very important, because local authorities lack capacity and skills to develop their first projects. They don't know how to search for funding. They don't know how all of that is organized, and the government is not able to provide like this structural systemic support on all these issues. So civil society organizations all these 4 years are playing critical role in development of kind of community and renewable energy in local authorities, and also kind of contribute to the whole transformation of the vision for the energy sector for the future of Ukraine. There are other examples, like for example, Nature Fund of Ukraine, that's initiative of Ukrainian and international organizations who set up an organization to support nature protected areas who also don't have enough funding. They even don't have fuel to kind of control the territory. So this initiative is to support like the critical needs of the nature reserve territories which are there now, but also kind of building for the future, and when the war is over, to help kind of develop these facilities into better management and provision of better, I don't know, educational programs and all what could be done. And the last aspect I wanted to mention is that like from the beginning of the war, and when the first territories were regained, and when like the first Ukraine reconstruction conferences started, many environmental organizations focused on the aspects of how to make reconstruction greener, how to make sure that the decisions which are taken for longer term investments into reconstruction of facilities actually take into account environmental aspects, but also kind of thinking of climate change measures, so that we kind of rebuild it aligned with the long-term climate goals. And this work is kind of ongoing. It's getting more and more challenging because of the war situation and because of the kind of all immediate needs which are happening. But those solutions which actually prove to be possible and economically feasible, they find their place. And renewable energy is one of the biggest examples, because now businesses and municipal communities are very much developing it, and there is a huge demand, and there are a lot of local stories happening about it. There are examples of heat pumps which are also developing in Ukraine because of the energy security issues. There are also examples of other EU integration norms which could actually help to construct infrastructure with less dependence on fossil fuels, but also less use of resources, and therefore kind of with less climate impact. And at the same time, there are processes of kind of sliding back on certain environmental legislation. And there are a lot of activities of organizations which try to preserve it. So kind of to safeguard the environmental policies which we used to have, and which are, due to the situation, are also kind of restricted or sliding back. I stop here.
Okay, yeah, for the moment, then we will hear again from you. So maybe I give the floor back to Aleksei. And Aleksei, if I can also ask you, maybe you can give us a little bit of an idea of the landscape of environmental activism in Ukraine. Now, Iryna mentioned some groups which operate at the local level, some others operate more of a national level, some are connected to international non-governmental organizations. What is the picture there? There's many different groups, I suppose, some more formal, some more informal. So maybe you can also tell something about who are these people, basically, and where or how they work.
Well, what I want to say that so I'm really proud and surprised of what Ukrainian activists and volunteers doing, because it's very hard to continue to be environmental and climate activists in the time of the war, and actually it's very hard to be an environmental climate activist right now. But they create a lot of projects, and they continue doing it, and I really think that it's because of a revolution of dignity in Ukraine, and this spirit which also Ukrainian society has. And when we talk about different scales, so I think it's a very good, nice cooperation between activists, volunteers, and NGOs. Because yeah, for sure, in Ukraine we have examples of very interesting and very good organizations like Eco Action, Greenpeace Ukraine, Environmental People Law, and they cooperate pretty well with volunteers. For example, Eco Action, they're analyzing the environmental consequences of war. It's mostly based on volunteers' work, monitoring and analyzing. And also, I want to mention the UA Animals and other groups and volunteers. And so there are a lot of them, and they have pretty well contact with each other, and they're really creating network. So because they can share resources, they can help each other, what works very well, and what is very also important that I believe that they can influence on governmental decision making, so they can really influence on it. And it's pretty untypical for the whole region. If we cannot compare with the situation in Belarus and Russia for sure, but if we will, for example, compare with the situation in Georgia, yeah, it's very complicated to influence on the decision government wants to make. And right now, so there is informational battle for recovering of Kakhovka hydro plant, and yeah, I think that it's also the way how people can influence how it will be, how the recovery of Ukraine can be. And it's yeah, it's it's what in Ukraine I think is happening right now. And I wanted to add about this international network, because I really think that right now activists and environmental climate activists can survive only if they work in network. So I know that there is a quite big support from European activists for Ukraine, and also European organizations trying to make any projects in Ukraine, like Arnika made a quite good project on Dnipro River, and also conflict environment observatories are trying to analyze the environmental consequences. I'm not sure that all the time the contact is pretty well, but so yeah, I think that there is a little bit lack of contact between European activists and Ukrainian activists, but anyway, so they're trying just to also to create this network. And it's what we really have to do. That's what we really should do, because it's only one way how we can make the recovery green. And as I said, for me, it's not like only the point of Ukraine, it's the point of the whole region. It can influence on the whole region.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know, Viktoriia, if you want to add something related to this, or no? Okay, you're muted. We can't hear you. I think we don't hear you, Viktoriia.
Oh,
Oh,
I'm
yes.
sorry. Now,
Yes.
can you hear me now?
Yes,
oh,
yes.
Great. Yeah, so I think not about the environmental and climate activism, because I'm not an activist. I'm just looking at them and looking in their results. So I'm not engaged in the activism process. But maybe we can talk about restoration.
Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
if you have some results that come to your mind, or some good example of effectiveness of the action that are taken either at the local level or at a more general level, that could be interesting. One question that I have is not just for you, but also for Iryna and Aleksei. It's about the relation between this activism and the institutions. From the picture you gave, it sounds that things are working quite well, also compared to other countries where there's not much dialogue or capacity of activists to influence policies or to have a real effect. And at the same time, I guess there are different kind of pressure groups or other issues or other considerations that authorities keep in mind, and they are not always environmental friendly, I suppose. So in your experience, how or what are the main challenges there in this dialogue between activists and institutions? If there are some very positive cases that maybe you have in mind, or on the contrary, some problematic cases that we should or should be kept in mind and addressed.
I think that the main problem is lack of communication between politicals and environmental activists now, because even politicians, they try to make and to build the dialogue, but by making like round tables or any other possibilities to talk with representatives of the NGOs. But I don't think they can listen and they can hear the people. And I also think that they also have they don't have the pressure from another companies, but their political will depends on the interests of some rich companies, and it also depends on many other factors. Iryna.
No, I didn't want to interrupt you.
Oh. Yeah, but that was what I wanted to say. So you may start.
Okay, so I'll continue. We have a lot of good examples, and the picture is mixed. So on one side, municipalities really lack capacities. Like they don't have people, they don't have resources, and they have a challenge to address so many issues in their municipalities for people that they are actually, in many cases, are very open for cooperation, and they're actually seeking for cooperation with different initiatives. And many of our partners have very fruitful cooperation with local authorities. So one example I gave is about development of the kind of first renewable energy project at the critical infrastructure, when NGOs actually kind of support them from the beginning to the end and make sure that the projects are implemented and working. There is another example when organization become kind of a bridge between many different institutions. Like, for example, one of the challenge that we recognize is lack of work skill for installation of renewable energy. So to make it systematic change, one of our partners called Repower, they initiated cooperation between business association, local technical educational centers, but also regional job centers to make sure that there are on a regular basis the programs in the job centers for veterans or people who want to kind of find another job, but aligned it to the needs of kind of businesses who operate in the field and based on the kind of operating educational centers. And before they end, like it doesn't happen on its own. So basically the role of NGO to bring all of them together, to set some agenda and to make sure that it actually runs and implemented. Or another example of starting the course in the Transport University on for engineers on how to design cycling infrastructure. In Ukraine, none of the universities had this program. So basically, like if we talk about green reconstruction, it's a challenge of having the people who actually understand how to do things and what the modern concepts of green reconstruction in different fields mean. So NGOs kind of see that because of this lack in the like even in the formal educational institutions, they come with initiative to kind of start bringing these new courses in different fields, and that's also very well accepted by universities. On the other side, there is, of course, there are issues where for NGOs it's very difficult to get to the decision makers, and it's often related to some very concrete development cases, to some more kind of difficult systematic changes, or to kind of certain direction of the policy work, like we had with purchase of nuclear reactors last year or some other cases. So the picture is mixed, and we have kind of both examples on both sides, but I would say that still there are a lot of good examples which motivate and yeah, make this cooperation, but also bring more changes into institutions and into communities.
Yeah, maybe we can bring one more actor in this conversation, which is the European Union, which in the best case scenario maybe could really play a role of an ally of environmental groups who work at the grassroots level and the local level, and the EU has the power to exert pressure for systemic change and for change really at the national level, and has access to decision makers and has really the power to influence legislation and so on. So could work on the top-down direction while activists are so active and effective, as you pointed out, from the bottom up. And in this, coming really to the reconstruction issue and also the perspectives for the medium or long term for Ukraine, I feel the general expectation is that Ukraine will be able to actually enter the EU at some point. We'll see whether sooner or later, but anyway, in a matter of some years. And if it joins, then it means that it will have to adopt the EU environmental laws and standards and all that amount of legal framework as well as technical skills and schemes and programs and funding that are connected to entry into the EU. And this could really help in pushing a green agenda to some extent, even though the EU has its own problems with the Green Deal and so on. But anyway, despite the problems, there is a very strong environmental legislation and standards and funding. So short question, how do you feel about reconstruction of Ukraine and the environment on one side, and more specifically on the perspective of entry of the country into the EU, whether this will help, whether you see challenges there? Some of you mentioned before the problems with some renewable energy plants like wind plants, which yes, help energy transition, but have other environmental problems. How's your feeling about this environment and reconstruction in the long run? Maybe Iryna, we can start from you and then hear from Aleksei and Viktoriia as well, and then we will hear from the audience if there's anybody who has comments or questions to you.
Yeah, as a kind of former environmentalist also, and as a Ukrainian, I can say that kind of the nation in general is very much looking forward to integration. And for Ukrainians, it's not just kind of just entering EU for, I don't know, economic or some opportunities. It's actually a lot about values, because people want the country to be reformed based on kind of European values and principles. They want anti-corruption reforms to be implemented. They want the country kind of to have accountability from authorities on the local level and national level. They want the systems to operate smoothly. They want decisions to be taken kind of effectively, transparent. They want to make sure that kind of this decision do not just serve certain interests, but actually take into account the people, the environment, and other aspects of life. So for Ukraine, it's extremely important. And kind of working in environmental policy dimension in Ukraine for many years, I would say that like the direction towards certain structure of development of environmental policy started with Ukraine signing association agreement in 2014. And since then, whatever government would come, there is a kind of strict line of the necessary legislation to be implemented. And in the last years, a lot of legislation has been implemented. But of course, we still have a lot of legislation to implement in the future. So in general, kind of we see it as a positive, but also a very difficult task, because some of the legislation indeed requires a lot of funds to be implemented, a lot of administrative procedures, and that's of course like not easy because even of the lack of the staff in governmental or local authorities. Yeah, so that's kind of on the overall European integration direction. I would say that what is happening now and kind of what people expect. So the examples that I gave, they are kind of examples of climate solutions which are happening despite of the war and not because of environmental kind of thinking. So renewable energy is developing because that's the solution that can provide people and communities energy security and provide for critical kind of needs. So when people put solar panel on their house because they want the lift to operate when there is no electricity and kind of the lights to be in the house, and for hospitals and for water utilities, it is to provide with critical services. And that's why it's developing in Ukraine, because it's part really of the critical needs. And so with some other examples. And what I'm positive about is that there are, even in a wartime, like there are solutions which provide for all of this. So it's not kind of, so in Ukraine, there are still kind of transformations to happen, which bring certain benefits to people or save resources or provide for energy security. which means that like not everything, of course, not on a very high level technologies, but there are activities that could be done. Yeah, and I wanted to say something, but I lost my my ideas. So maybe I give the floor to colleagues. I could add.
Yeah, it will come back. Alexei, I don't
I
know.
remember, sorry, I remember. I quickly add, yes.
Okay.
So from the people perspective, because what we also see is that on one side, kind of it's a war. And of course, like environment is sliding on the governmental agenda and in terms of what people can care about in this time. But on the other side, like people also want to have the future. People also want to have kind of better cities. They want to have better quality of life. And especially those Ukrainians who had kind of, who left Ukraine, then came back or considered to come back and who lived in Europe. They expect much better kind of city planning. They want to have public transport. They want to be able to go with the kids, you know, by bicycle and have some leisure time. They want to have green areas which are well protected. So, and the green principles of city development is actually the ones that provide better quality of life. So it's also kind of part of overall expectation of people who want to have better life in Ukraine, and it's very much connected to implementation of those greener principles on national and city levels.
Yeah, this connection is very interesting. Alexei.
Yes, what I would like to add that for me, when we're talking about green recovery, it's also to understand how Ukraine people will manage with polluted territories, with mine territories, and there are a lot of them in the country. And one of the solutions that I think can be good also for Ukraine and for European Union is creating more reserves, national parks on these territories, because also Ukraine has quite good experience with Chernobyl Biosphere Reserve, which was also polluted after the catastrophe. And this year it will be 40 years of Chernobyl catastrophe. And yeah, when we in our group we discussing how we can start the green recovery. Of course, it's depends on how infrastructure will be recovered and how the cities will recover. But also, it would be good just to create more nature reserve territories. Maybe it can be solution for frontline, which is really polluted and mined. And what also I would like to add that. I was really surprised that a lot of projects continued during the time of the war. For example, the projects in just transition of coal mining cities, mono-cities, and they continued in Ukraine. So it means that the wartime, it wasn't like a step back from Europe integration. So with the help of organizations, with the help of activists, with the help of volunteers, so there are a lot of projects which continue going on. And it really gives a hope. And as I say, for me right now, like the key for Green Deal in Europe, it's also in Ukraine, in the countries, because, for example, some projects like Nature 2000 or Emerald Network, that really depends on how it will go in Ukraine, how the green recovery in Ukraine will happen. And I have hope. I cannot live without hope. And when it's very depressive and tragic, just only analyzing the environmental consequences, I really have always to find the solutions. And yeah, I think there is a hope that Ukraine will be green, and also we will slowly go to climate neutrality, carbon neutrality in Europe. Because Ukraine, it's Europe, and also other countries like Belarus, it's also Europe. Like, yeah, we should understand and think about it.
Sure, thank you for this. Viktoriia, do you want to add something, or shall we look at whether anybody from the audience wants to ask something or comment?
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to add that green recovery in Ukraine for now is more about energy transition, but not about the protection of the nature and recovery of the nature. For example, no one talks about recultivating of damaged soils on the territories damaged by the bombs, for example. No one tells about the chemicals that remain in that soils and how we will use it in the future. And no one is going to do that, and we have similar problems with the nature and with the safe environment, and no one is going to solve that problems. So all our Ukrainian environmental recovery strategy is about the energy, and of course we need that solution, but we also need other solutions for that. And I think again that the problem is lack of communication between government and people who work in that areas, like people who work in the biosphere reserves and national parks, people who work in scientific institutions. Government maybe it wants not to see them, I don't know, but it seems that no one wants to hear that solutions, because they are not so like that's not an emergency now, I think. Yeah, but I think that the solution for that is if our government will hear that, and we will build a really green strategy of recovery of Ukraine. And for that process, people from different industries should be involved, not only energy companies, but also people from scientific institutions, people from environmentalists, people from nature protecting NGOs, and the representatives of the communities. All the people should build a dialogue and create a restoration strategy, because now our restoration strategy looks like an energy strategy, and we also need that, but that's not enough.
Thank you, Viktoriia. This, of course, it's complex, but I guess it's complex everywhere. I mean, some of the things you said, I think, resonate also in other European countries, which don't have to deal with the war itself, but like dialogue between activists and institutions is not easy per se. And some of these challenges you mentioned on the role of the focus on energy rather than on other aspects of nature and the environment. I mean, many of these challenges are common to other countries, I think, in Europe, and hopefully, I mean, again, in the best case scenario, I think it would make sense to deal with such challenges in Ukraine and elsewhere together with some cross-border collaboration and alliances between civil society, institutions, etc. But yeah, it's a long road, but the good, at least let's travel on in the right direction on this road, and this is already a good starting point. I don't know if anybody from the audience wants to ask something. You can do this by voice, or also by writing in the chat if you prefer. So I see, Aleksei, you raised your hand, so if you want to open your mic.
Yes, thank you so much for the presentation. I'm actually not sure who exactly to address the question, but first I would like to ask, can you highlight some kind of most critical impacts or like issues that appeared within the war? Are they like mined territories or like pollution at the war line, or maybe even pollution from current generators that cross all the streets?
Thank you, Aleksei. I see that Alberto posed a question in the chat, so maybe I also add this one, and then Viktoriia, Iryna, and Aleksei, you see how to answer or what to answer. So Alberto is asking about the perception of the environmental emergency by younger people, for instance, school children, whether teachers and schools talk about it. And I see that also Tatiana is asking about the future for the areas of Ukraine where the fighting took place. As I think Aleksei mentioned, there's a problem of mines and there's a number of other consequences on those territories. So what are the possible solutions? I don't know who wanna start. We have not so much time, so if you can keep short answers, that's great, but you are pretty good with the time limits, so I'm sure you can manage.
I can start quickly.
Yep.
So on the first question, I think it's very difficult to answer because many of the pollution aspects are local, and then if there is a huge spill because of the attack on some chemical plant or air pollution, yeah, that creates a lot of environmental pollution for people who live there. Kakhovka Dam, of course, was the huge case, but it's just like so many dimensions and so many territories which are affected directly from the military activities, but also these indirect action activities which kind of happen on the controlled territory that make it even worse. On the second one, yes, the Ukrainian curriculum have issues. We have to understand that because of the war in many communities, kind of children study online or sit underground all the time. So in general, the education for children is extremely challenging these years. And it has been very challenging for children also. But I think one of the aspects that's kind of my dream to see more in the future is that there are kind of more organized nature territories where people and families and kids can go and to kind of love nature, not just from the books, but actually directly. And that natural parks also have good facilities to accept children and kind of to tell them more and to get them more attached to the nature. So that's the dream of the Nature Fund of Ukraine, to have more such facilities and more such engagement happening. But that's also kind of the work that many activists all over Ukraine are doing for protecting the green areas in their cities or communities or outside, so that, yeah, these territories are there for people to enjoy the nature and care for it.
Thank you. Viktoriia or Aleksei, do you want to maybe add something?
Yeah, my answer was very similar to Iryna said. So you can't highlight only one issue of the war and say that that's the worst, or you can say that exactly that ecosystem it was damaged mostly than others ecosystem. But if you want to highlight the damage of the war at all, just look at the cases that Ukrainians call ecocide, like. Explosion on Kakhovka Dam was the biggest ecocide, I think. So you can start from that case and then move to the others, like to the pollution of the Black Sea. There were so many cases of pollution of the Black Sea, and I'm sure you heard about that thousands of dolphins that died in the Black Sea. We don't have thousands, but we have a lot, and we found a lot on the Ukrainian shore. Yeah, so you can start from the pollution of the Black Sea and from the Kakhovka Dam.
Thank you, Aleksei.
Yeah, I have short comments. So when we're talking about pollution, it's very complicated because during the world there are new examples of pollutions. And right now, for example, we're trying to make research how this use of FPV drones and fiber optic can influence on the territories, frontline territories, because they're covered by this fiber optic net, and it's also can be like microplastic pollution, and also it can influence on animals and birds. But it's a quite new example of pollution. So, and even like big analyzers like CEOPS, they don't have any methodology how to analyze it. And for example, like non-petroleum oil pollution that we see right now in Tuzlowski Liman, it's also it's not like a new pollution type of pollution, but it's also like and not very well analyzed, I think, for in Ukrainian case. So that's why I really think that when we're talking about ecocide, it's really ecocide in the whole Ukraine. And what is really important that so right now, some organizations like Environmental People Laws are they're continuing to collect information about the ecocide. So it for sure will be represented in Ukrainian criminal court, and also I hope that it will be represented in international criminal court, and maybe ecocide can become a part of Rome Statute. So it's very important, and it can open it can help a lot of organizations all over the world also to start their own ecocide cases. And about young people, I have a lot of examples like young people becoming environmental and climate activists. They're involved in the process of volunteering, working in Gardens for Victory, in organizing different initiatives. So yeah, for me, it's also mean that there is like a new generation growing right now, which also can be involved in environmental movement. Actually, they're right now active participants of environmental movement. I can just like examples like Rosary organization, and also, as I said, so for Eco Action, there are a lot of young volunteers who work in analyzing the environmental consequences of the full-scale invasion, Russian full-scale invasion. And for the front line, yeah, it's a very complicated question, how it will be solved. And as I said, so the one of solution is just keep it wild. I think it can be good. So maybe we will have like a very big nature reserve in eastern front line frontier of Europe. It also can be pretty good for Europe, for Ukraine. I hope so, because right now it's very hard to understand how all these territories can be demined, how even for agriculture use, because they are polluted. Maybe like the best solution can be just to keep it wild.
Thank you. I think we need to stop here. There was one more question related to critical raw materials, but I'm afraid that if we start talking about critical raw materials, we won't make it in a few minutes. It's such a huge topic in itself, as many of the topics that we mentioned today. So it was more like having a glimpse on some of the things that are happening in Ukraine and having some hints about them. What I can suggest to the people who attended this webinar is to really take a look at the websites of the organizations that Iryna, Viktoriia, and Aleksei work for, because there's a lot of very interesting materials on many of the issues that we mentioned today. Some of them is already in English, some of it isn't, but can easily be translated through online tools. So yes, we will keep covering these topics through our Pulse network of media. So stories will come out in many different languages across all Europe in the next months and so on. So hopefully we will manage to tell some of these stories to the people. If I can, let me remind about the webinar and the next webinar that is taking place on Tuesday next week. It's about refugees from Ukraine in Europe and EU countries, and especially Central Eastern Europe, and growing hostility towards them. This will happen at 1:30 on Tuesday next week. You will find some reference online. Let me thank everybody for attending this and being present till the end, and especially Iryna, Viktoriia, and Aleksei. Thank you so much for your stories and inputs and insights, and also for generally speaking for the work you do. I think it's very critical. So thank you a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So goodbye, everyone, and be in touch.
Bye.